say we want these open internet rules, but it's not about, we're not going to regulate rates. We're not going to regulate prices, right? I don't think I'm wrong about it. A lot of people hear that during the debate. In fact, Austin Schlick issued a memo. This was to justify the so-called third way proposal, which was actually even more stringently common carrier regulation than what they ended up with, which itself is very common carrier-like. But that had no rate regulation subtitle. And on the same day, Chairman Janikowski issued his own statement that said this will not involve pricing regulation. You can look it up. Now, what are the oops, I'm not used to these director chairs. Tom, I may have to reimburse you for this chair. But here's the point, and listen, this is important. The rules haven't become effective yet, but there are two complaints out there, right, that sound in net neutrality that could become complaints. Maybe they won't, but they're being put forward in terms of net neutrality. One is Comcast Level 3, and the other concerns Metro PCS's offering of some tiered type of services that have different access requirements. Now, I don't want to go in now to the details of either one of these things. Most of you are familiar with the complaints. But here's the point. Both of those complaints, what are they really about? They're about pricing, right? You think Level 3 is engaging in this fight because of some principles, but because it says it should get one price, Comcast says another. Same thing, Free Press files, against Metro PCS. Metro PCS has a $40, $50, $60, three tiers. As an aside, I'll say to me, it makes perfect sense, and for the $60 tier, you get as much as you do from almost every other carrier. But they have this, and I'm not saying prejudging what the commission will do, but the whole complaint of Free Press is about price. The price is too high. For $40, low-income people can't afford that. The price should be different. Now, and they're all under net neutrality. Now, if the commission were to go forward, let me put it this way. If the rules become effective, if complaints were filed, if the commission doesn't fairly quickly deal with these complaints by dismissing the complaints and start establishing precedents, as it's going to do as it goes forward and deals with further complaints that will eventually establish some jurisprudence on this. If it doesn't dismiss these complaints, then ultimately I would say that will have an effect on further types of innovation in terms of different services, different models, different types of experimentation. Because what will we have as part of net neutrality? Regulation of prices, which, my friend, is generally inherent in a discrimination standard, because most times discrimination sounds in terms of price. Okay.
So, Richard, what would you say in terms of what you perceive to be innovation? Perhaps focusing on innovation in the network versus the edge, and to answer the question, in addition to or different from profit, what do you see as a potential catalyst for innovation?
Yeah. Working for a foundation that has innovation in its name, I've been through
I thought you might have some.
A few conversations about what innovation means, and in essence, it's simply the improvement of a service, a process, a product. Improvements. It's technical improvements. That's what innovation is. It's in the nature of technology, however, that technical improvements tend to cascade, just like mistakes do. But when you improve, say, the underlying capacity or capability of a network to deliver information in a timely or economical fashion, then it's not everything in this world is about price. Some of it is actually about quality, reliability, security. There are other dimensions. When you make an improvement in a foundation technology like that, you enable improvements to be made in the technologies that build on top of that. And what's pretty evident in the internet ecosystem, the fact that it is an ecosystem, And it kind of reminds me of a discussion we had at ITIF a year ago about whether a consensus was emerging on net neutrality. And it seemed like, it was, until one of the panelists took issue with another panelist's use of the term ecosystem when, the particular portion of it that he provided was special and different and should have more regulations. And it's kind of like Commissioner McDowell's not here today, but he said the most common request they get at the FCC is, please regulate my rival. And so, there's always this kind of gamesmanship in regulation and public policy where people seek to get an advantage over their competitors. But while I appreciate Randy's concerns about price regulation, those are certainly part of the story, and I think certainly to the economists, everything is about price. I'm not an economist or a lawyer, I'm a technologist. And I'm more concerned about things that won't be available at any price if we don't get the regulations right. And I think that's where we take the hit to innovation, is that if we say presumptively there are certain practices that just kind of aesthetically seem so heinous that we're not going to permit, like discrimination. I mean, who could be in favor of discrimination? What a horrible thing. I mean, why did we fight the civil rights struggles of the 60s, If we're going to permit discrimination in our networks. But, discrimination is not always unreasonable. There's discrimination between hot water and cold water, and when you're taking a shower, you definitely prefer one of those over the other, and you don't want to be robbed of that level of discrimination. And then, cold water showers are no fun. So it's important, that we're always going to have regulatory frameworks on technology, especially on networks. Network markets aren't the same as the markets for cabbage, okay? But it's important to get them right.
All right, Larry, you are both a lawyer and a technologist. What's your reaction to the question?
So, when I think about innovation, certainly the innovation I'm most interested in is what Clayton Christensen refers to as disruptive technology, as opposed to incremental improvement. So obviously, you can innovate in an incremental way, but I think what's important to me is the innovation that's disruptive, and therefore revolutionary. And it upends the rules of industries, and it changes the structure of supply chains, and that's the kind of innovation that I think is obviously the most valuable, but also the most disruptive by its very name, and the one that is most confusing, not just to governments, but also to businesses and frankly, to consumers as well. And obviously, the internet technologies have that quality, even though Christensen, his book came out really before the consumer internet revolution took off. Clearly, this could have been his poster child if he'd written a couple of years later. And one of the characteristics of a disruptive technology is, as both Richard and Randy suggest, it's very difficult to predict its trajectory. And so if you try to make rules, which may be sensible, maybe good intentioned rules, ahead of time, you don't know what you're going to stop or slow, and you may never know because somebody didn't do something that they might otherwise have done. I mean, some of these things are obvious, but a lot of them are not so obvious. So you can think about this in a positive way as well. One of the reasons that disruptive technologies are revolutionary is that they often have these positive returns to scale, or what economists would call network effects. And that particularly, certainly, again, the internet is the poster child. The more people who are on it, the more valuable the network becomes. And so one of the things you could think about for governments to do is to encourage, whatever ways possible, more access by more people. Right? And I think one of the things in the National Broadband Plan, many things in the National Broadband Plan that I agreed with strongly was the idea of, in fact, here's an example where government can intervene and, in God forbid, even provide subsidies to get people who otherwise couldn't get access either because of their geographic location or because of their income level, to get them access, to get them connected. And if you wanted to talk about it from an economic standpoint, you'd say the net effect to society will more than justify, because of these network effects, the net effect of doing that would in fact be beneficial to society. We would get more bang for our buck. The more people that we get online, the better that we improve overall economic performance. And it's an example where some intervening party can have a positive effect. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning that governments can do is to create the space for innovation and keep it as clean and free as possible. And one terrific example of this, not necessarily intended for this purpose, but worked out that way, was in the '96 Communication Act, Section 230, the freedom from liability for third-party content. This, probably wasn't its intention, but it's worked an amazing effect on making it possible for all kinds of services to develop free of the fear that they're going to get sued for what users might post or what other people might do. And I don't think it's any coincidence that companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are United States-based entities, because in fact the Section 230 rule is not the same elsewhere in the world. It's the reverse in many parts of the EU and in Asia as well. And so in some sense, by setting up what I think of as an anti-law, or as a law that prohibits law from entering in a particular innovation space, the federal government did a wonderful service in that regard, and the payoffs have been tremendous.
So I wanted to pick up, and I think you used the term stimulative regulation. Another example that came to my mind as I was listening to you was the act that Congress put into effect in 1993 at this point, which was the section of the Communications Act that authorized the FCC to actually auction spectrum and also created the federal framework for commercial mobile radio services, where the Congress and then the FCC implemented a set of regulations that were focused more on the objective to be achieved rather than micromanaging the process of how you get from here to there. Some would argue that we might be at a tipping point right now in terms of that perspective, at least coming out of the FCC, may be changing. Question for all of you guys, because I would be remiss if I didn't bring wireless into this conversation. Larry, we'll start with you. Would you agree that if you look at the wireless sector here in the United States, would you view that as falling into your definition of innovation? And what is the economic relevance of what you see happening?
So absolutely. Obviously, I would even go stronger than that and say that sort of mobile internet is the internet as far as I'm concerned. I'm not really looking anymore at how the wireline development happens, because so much more interesting things have been happening, both from a network standpoint, but also from an application standpoint, services standpoint, in mobile broadband. And that really is the future, I think, of access. It's for future of use. It has so many obvious benefits to being untethered. Of course, it has some significant technological hurdles to overcome. It has some significant regulatory hurdles to overcome, and the most significant one being, as Congressman Boucher was saying, the spectrum crisis, or the looming spectrum crisis, or depending on who you're asking, the ancient spectrum crisis. And this is another area where there is an important role for government. Somebody, it doesn't really matter if it's the FCC or some special group that's targeted, but there has to be one and only one person responsible for identifying who uses what spectrum. We obviously can't all use the same spectrum. That wouldn't work. In some ways, we don't really care who's making the rule as long as somebody is making the rule, and therefore has the ability to enforce it. We all want that. We all want to make sure that what we're doing isn't interfering with someone else, and what they're doing isn't interfering with us. And the nature of radio communications is such that that's simply required. What's obviously become important over the last 10 years is the realization that the best possible use of spectrum changes much more quickly now than it might have in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Because we have many, many more technologies and the kind of the snowball effect of more and more coming all along that could possibly be useful things, we have to set up a structure that's much more flexible than it has been, and that it needed to be. So one thing, for example, is to make it easier for licensees who don't need their spectrum, aren't using their spectrum anymore, to be able to divest themselves of them in a way that a better use could come along. And I think the secondary markets are a great opportunity. The problem with the primary auctions is that it just takes so much time to set up and do. By then, crisis has arrived. So it would be nice if the secondary markets had a lot more flexibility, that I can, yes, I'll buy your spectrum and I will pay you a higher price because I've got the ability to put it to a use without having to go through relicensing that would be more valuable to consumers and therefore more profitable to me.
that word profit has popped up again, Randy. What are your thoughts generally on wireless? Is it an example of innovation, do you think? And is it relevant to our overall discussion about, trying to spur economic growth,